Okay, we're going to conduct an interview with Philip Mantle, and we're going to look at his life's work, and we're going to look at his perceptions on the phenomenon and in terms of UFOs. So the first question I've got is basically, how did you get interested in ufology? What was the main turning point? Was there an actual experience, or was it that you were just interested in science fiction, or what was the key moment, the key point?
Quite simple, really, Pierre. I mean, when I look back, I always had an interest in all things paranormal, for want of a better word. And I was also interested in horror movies, science fiction, and astronomy. You know, I look at myself as being part of the space age, the race to the moon, and you know, and so on. But certainly the paranormal figured a lot. Might come from my mother's background, because she was from Northern Ireland. And she told us the story of when she met a fairy in Ireland on their farm.
Wow. That's
complete with wings, and she said, I don't know if this was real or not, but to me it was.
Was she a child, or was she in Ireland?
Yeah, no, she was a teenager. She wasn't a baby.
Yeah.
And where they used to live was the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally.
Did she speak to this being?
Yeah, she went on their land, which was only a small holding. They were quite poor. There was a small stream, and she often used to play by the stream because there was nothing else to do. And she met a fairy, wings, a female fairy.
Right.
And this fairy said, I'll give you this little bottle to drink out of, and if you do, you'll never have an accident. So she drank it.
Right.
And she stuck to the story till her dying day.
And this fairy, I mean, was this just a very small fairy, or was it actually quite a large
No,
fairy?
it was a, action man size, I'd call it.
Action man size.
It wasn't petite, and it wasn't, and it wasn't the leprechaun of fable in Ireland. It was a fairy.
And did she just see this once? It was just
the once. But what my mum did instill in me was a fascination of things, and certainly reading, brought up in the days long before the internet.
Before we talk about that, can we just get back to the fairy? Because I'm quite interested in actually what this fairy looked like. What was the fairy dressed in?
It was a pretty little girl.
Like a Barbie doll?
Yeah, a fairy with pretty wings and pretty clothes.
Can you remember what colour the clothing was?
I can't.
But it's a very intriguing story, isn't it?
What I will say is, she told me the story several times, and she told my children.
Yes.
And the story never changed. There was never anything added to it. So
And did you outside of ufology, did you have any paranormal experiences yourself, which could be described as, let's say, spirits or ghosts? Or
no, I tried to be. I mean, my own father died when I was 2.
Right.
And my mum remarried 5 or 6 years later.
Yeah.
And so I never really knew my father.
Yeah.
It just so happened my friend's grandmother lived opposite us, and she introduced me to the Spiritualist Church,
right,
which I found absolutely fascinating, although it wasn't necessarily for me, but I certainly went along.
It piqued your interest, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've often said, when we used to come back from the school holidays at high school, sometimes they'd say, oh, what did you do through the holidays? And some people would say, oh, I went to Spain or whatever. And what about you, Philip? Out to the Spiritualist Church, right, which wasn't a great one for pulling the girls.
Did you have any contact, or did your dad ever come through?
No. And I was just.
Was you convinced about the veracity of the spirit and afterlife? I mean, were there people in the church where perhaps that you knew them and that you knew some of the people who were coming through?
I didn't know anybody there apart from my friend's grandma.
Right. Okay.
And. I found them genuine in their beliefs.
Yeah.
There was no money passing hands or anything like that, but it didn't convince me.
Yeah, you never found any real compelling evidence.
No, it never convinced me because I didn't know my father.
Yeah.
So if they could have given me a message
and then
that I didn't know, and I could go back and tell my mum and say, this is what they said, and she could verify it, but that never happened.
Right.
So there was nothing. I've always had that curious mind, Pierre. I'm one of these, if there's a button that says don't press, I want to press it to see what happens.
Just out of interest then, was this interest then deviated, let's say, towards ufology, or was it just a very wide interest that gradually, as you became older, became more honed into the UFO question and
it narrowed as time went along, by accident really, the design. And I read it. I was very interested in astronomy, and I still have a passing interest in it now.
Right.
And I read a book, and it had one chapter on UFOs in it,
Yeah.
basically dismissing it. For the life of me, I can't remember the title of the book.
I think there's plenty of books like that, though, aren't there?
And I thought, well, that's interesting, is that? And it mentioned an organisation, the British UFO Research Association.
Right. Mm.
I wrote to them, and I actually joined for a year, but
Yeah.
they were mainly based in London at the time.
Yeah.
And then my aunt, who lived round the corner from us, she brought the local newspaper in one evening, and there was a small ad.
Right.
First meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society.
Right.
Sunday.
Right.
Centenary House, North Street, Leeds.
Right.
And off I went.
Right.
And it was organised by Graham and Mark Birdsall.
Wow. How old were you at this?
I was 20.
20, right, okay. Okay.
And that was it, I was hooked.
You were hooked.
I sat there, they put on some lectures.
Yeah.
Tony Dodd was there, who was a police
Right.
sergeant in North Yorkshire, and there was about 20 or 30 people there.
Yeah.
And for about 6 months I sat there and took it all in.
Right.
Got a few magazines, bought a few books, but that wasn't enough. I wanted to find out for myself.
You want to be actually involved.
Yes, and that's what I did.
And in terms of the books, was there a gradual progression? I mean, was there just an interest, or what, did you just get to a certain point where you thought to yourself, right, that's it, I really want to research this, I want to document this, I want to write about this?
Well, I think we were fortunate, Pierre, because at the time, we're talking the early 1980s here now.
Yeah.
Areas in and around Skipton in the Yorkshire Dales was inundated with reports.
Right.
And most of the time, a lot of them filtered down to us.
Right, okay.
So this wasn't something in America or whatever, it was something in our own backyard that I could actually get involved in.
Yeah.
And I could go and speak to these people. And if I was lucky enough, maybe I might even see the phenomenon myself.
Right.
Which, we did both.
Right.
And so, that satisfied my curiosity in speaking to these individuals firsthand.
Yeah.
No internet.
Yeah.
And then telling me what they'd encountered.
And just so you said that you saw some of this phenomenon yourself during the course of your investigations. Are we just talking about light phenomenon, or are we talking about other things as well?
Well, I'll explain it to you. Great. I didn't drive in those days, so I was on Calton Moor one evening with Graham Birdsall, just me and him, and we're looking out across the moor. And we've been there many times. There was no buildings. There's no illumination.
Right.
And then in the distance we saw a little light, white light. And I said to Graham, "What's that?" He said, "Don't know."
Right.
Now down in the dip, I believe there's a little village called, I think it's called Lothersdale.
Okay.
So Graham got in the car. We'll go and have a look. Well, now Graham used to drive like a madman.
Right.
Because it's pitch black, and I'm sat there, and as the dry stone walls going past. At one point, I got a view down the valley,
right,
and I could just see this mass of coloured lights.
Okay.
You know, sometimes when the firework goes up and then it explodes.
Yeah.
It was similar to that, but it wasn't any firework.
Right.
This was about 1 o'clock in the morning by this time.
Was this kind of phosphorescent light, or do you think it was attached to a structure?
Who knows?
Who knows?
It was pitch black, and there was all this circle of bright lights. And I told Graham, and all that did was make Graham drive even faster.
Right, okay.
And he was peeved because he didn't see it.
And was this just a flash of light? So it was there one moment and gone the next?
Just gone, because we were driving so fast.
Yeah.
And I was looking out down the valley.
Yeah.
Most of the time, all you saw was the dry stone walls.
Yes, of course.
And we drove down into Lothersdale. We drove around the moors and didn't see anything again that night. And Graham was not best pleased.
No, but was this consistent with a lot of the phenomenon which was actually being reported at this time?
Yeah. I mean, I remember one chap we interviewed up there. He used to own a cattery.
Yeah.
So he come out late at night to do, I don't know, feed the cats or do one last inspection.
Yeah.
And where his place was again was quite rural. It was very dark, and he said there was all these lights out the back of his house, and they were performing aerial acrobatics as he described it. And they were right there. There weren't little lights, miles and miles in the distance.
No.
They were there.
They were
on his property.
Lights. Yeah.
Was
he afraid, or just more sort of
he was
curious?
mesmerised.
Right, mesmerised.
He'd heard, I think, other little reports. But that was the last thing he was thinking of. He was going to see to his animals, his livelihood.
And so, at this point, when you're investigating all this light phenomenon, I mean, did you think that there was perhaps a number of different interpretations? So, for example, you were perhaps dealing with, let's say, a light phenomenon, ball lightning, but also perhaps you were also dealing with extraterrestrial craft. I mean,
yeah, I think, you know, what I looked upon as our job was to document this.
yes.
First and foremost, document
So
it.
not to have too many predetermined ideas.
And
what this
then
phenomenon
try and
is.
figure it out later, because it wasn't just all lights that were seen. That was the main thing.
Yeah.
But I mentioned Tony Dodd. I mean, Tony saw this object one night with these 3 large lights underneath it, and
Yeah.
he was in his patrol car at the time, because they used to sit up on the moors because they got better radio reception.
Right.
And this object flew past him, so
Yeah.
he's with a colleague.
Mm.
He put on the blue light, and it turned around and came back.
Right.
And Tony's convinced it's a reaction to the blue light.
Okay.
It may or may not have been,
Yeah.
but the fact is that's what happened.
So that kind of infers that there was this intelligence that is sentient, that it was actually reacting to.
Well, you can infer, you know, a whole host of things, but
Yeah.
the fact, you know, just that is
At that
what
instant,
happened, you know. And I mean, there were many more sightings, not just there. Then we looked further afield,
Yeah.
and there were many sightings of similar things with 3 lights underneath.
Can I ask you about cattle mutilations? Did you get any reports of cattle mutilations?
None at all. None at all.
So you were basically just dealing specifically with light phenomenon and.
Well, UFO reports
UFO.
of every type and shape.
Yeah.
It's just that in and around those moors it was mainly lights, although not all.
Yeah.
But we got everything. I mean, you name it, we had it.
Right. Right.
Photographs,
Right.
you know, close encounters, you know.
So were there any cases of entities then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a few cases, or were they?
There wasn't a lot at that time.
No.
I've got to be honest.
And was there a pattern? I mean, in terms of the
No,
descriptions,
well, we looked-
very varied.
I think there's a number of reasons, Pierre. Is one, there was a bigger stigma then than there is now to going on the record.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, you say, oh, I saw these funny lights. Yeah, you might get a chuckle in the pub, but that's about it. But to say you've, you know, encountered something
Yeah.
other than that, up close and personal.
Yeah.
One springs to mind, of course, is Police Constable Alan Godfrey in the
Yeah.
late 1970s in Todmorden,
Yeah.
while
Yeah.
on patrol. There were other similar incidents, and but again, a lot of people were reluctant to tell us, and when they did, they didn't want any mention of it anywhere.
Was
you
this
know?
would you say this was also an underlying problem within the field of ufology in general? It was almost like, well, yeah, we can talk about it being in the sky, but we don't really want to talk about it actually, you know, the implications.
No, I think we were quite willing to talk about it.
Yes.
But there was the stigma in the public,
So
and
people-
certainly in the media.
And people were not coming forward.
Yeah, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
So, you know, like a number of organisations, adopted the policy that, well, we're not interested in giving it to the media, it's just for our own research.
Of course. So were there any cases with entities which really stood out for you?
There's one, and it was nowhere near the moors. And it came in the early 1980s,
Right.
and it was at Normanton. It's just down the road from
Normanton, right.
here. And a lady contacted me, and the first thing she said on the phone was, you won't believe me.
Right.
You know, you won't believe me. Anyway, cut a long story short, Mark Birdsall and myself went to see this lady, and it was the school holidays, and 4 or 5 children of hers had been playing outside, and she lived in an elevated house near the end of a cul-de-sac. Beyond this cul-de-sac is a little few fields, a little stream, and some electricity pylons.
Yeah.
And she was washing the dishes up after lunch. The kids come running in. Mum, something crashed in the field.
Right.
So she came out the front door, and because it was an elevated house, she could see across these fields.
Yeah.
And she said it's Mexican hat-shaped thing
Right.
in the field.
Yeah.
But it was like a grey-silver colour. So she got the children. They made their way towards it. At one point, they went down a little dip.
Yeah.
They lost sight of it. Come up the other side. There's a fence. And now there was 3 tall beings, all dressed in white, with a visor, mittens, not gloves,
Right.
and a big wedge on their boots.
Right.
And the kids weren't bothered. They wanted to climb the fence,
Yeah.
but she held them back.
Yeah.
And these 3 beings walked behind this thing. It rose vertically and then moved off at an angle.
Wow, that's
And I even interviewed one of the children's friends.
Mm.
He wasn't there at the time because
Yeah.
he'd gone home to have lunch,
right.
came back
Mm.
and had missed it all,
Right.
but told us, everybody was excited
Yeah,
about it. And
yeah.
they didn't call it a spaceship or a spaceman.
It was a Mexican.
It was a Mexican. Or another way she described it was like a tank, an
Okay.
army tank, but
Right.
with no gun on it,
Yeah, I got you.
but smooth.
Yeah. Like.
And she wouldn't allow us to publish her name, and she was the type of person I'd grown up all my life with. I mean,
Yeah.
it's normal
So there
to-
was no doubt in your mind that she was actually telling the truth. She was recounting something that had occurred.
Yeah, I mean, there was no rational explanation for what she said.
When you were speaking to her, do you think that changed her perception about the phenomenon? Do you think that she went from being, let's say, a complete total disbeliever to somebody now who was very open-minded about?
That can happen, of course.
Yeah.
It can change people's perception and beliefs because the UFO investigators are coming.
Yeah.
Which is different from
Mm.
the newspaper men are coming,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like in the abduction cases when you say, I never had any influence on the witness. Well, you're an influence just by being there,
Of course.
on
Yeah.
what you are, on
Yeah.
what you represent that
Yeah.
can change things.
Yeah.
But she just stuck to her story. She was a very down to earth lady.
What did she think it was?
She hadn't a clue.
She didn't have a clue.
And interestingly enough, Pierre, that you mentioned that, down the years I've interviewed a number of close encounter witnesses,
Mm.
abductions, whatever. And I've put that question to them.
Yeah.
I've said, well, look,
Mm.
you've had this up close and personal. I haven't.
Mm.
What do you think it was?
Right.
What is its nature and origin? Some are convinced it's ET. Others thought it was more spiritual.
Right.
A larger proportion just said, look, Philip, I don't know.
Just
Some felt that I don't know,
Mm.
but I know it's important. And it's
Right.
important enough for me to speak out about it and speak up about it.
Yes. Yeah.
And even one young lad thought it was the Russians. He didn't. It was just his way of dealing with it, his way of rationalising it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's very understandable, I think, because I think there's a tendency if a person has an experience that they can't explain, that they really want to try and rationalise that, and it's almost making the phenomenon safe, that they feel safe
Well, that's
about
it.
thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, he had nightmares afterwards, and his
Yeah.
way of coping with it was, one, to have some hypnotherapy,
Yeah,
and B, to think, well, it must have been the Russians, because this terrified him,
yeah.
and the bad guys at the time
Mm.
were the Russians,
Right. So at this point in your early career, had you begun collecting data, and was there an intention to actually formalise this and to produce a work or to produce some research and books, or did that come much later?
No, I mean, we didn't really have a plan other than that we tried to. I mean, we had a big map
Yeah,
with everything plotted on it, so we could see where the concentration of was,
yeah,
which was in and around Carlton War.
right,
So our aims, if you like, was to try and confront it ourselves.
right, okay, get the actual proof, the
You
physical
know,
proof.
And I got a brief glimpse of it, I believe, but I never anything that was so close. Others did,
Right,
but we didn't. Graham, Mark, and myself lectured at Leeds University to the whole of the physics department to
right.
try and get them on board.
And how were they? Were they open-minded?
They
at
were
all?
great. They
Right.
were absolutely great. But this was a time of cutbacks in universities and so
Okay.
on. So they didn't have any resources that.
So it wasn't practical to conduct
So
a study,
field research.
Field research,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm interested in terms of the Carlton case. Do you have any feedback now in terms of what's happening there? Are UFOs still being reported there regularly?
Not anything personally myself of late,
Yeah,
because we haven't got that structure
Yeah.
in place now,
yeah,
and it's changed with the internet because
Yeah.
people can report it to a wide variety of places.
yeah.
Whereas when we first started, we were really the only ones.
Is it still very active research in Yorkshire? I know it used to be in the 1980s, but is it still a hotbed of lots of research, or is it just that there's a lot of people, but they're just doing their own thing and doing their own independent research?
I think it's just a few doing their own thing now.
Right,
rather
but
than
before
organ-
it was more of a network of people.
It was. I mean, Graham and I don't take anything for it. Graham and Mark Birdsall, they started it,
Yeah,
and we got a network of investigators, if you like,
yeah.
around the area, and that spread into other counties nearby.
Mm.
Not necessarily on purpose; it just did.
It just did. Yeah.
You know, and we were able to utilise people all over the place.
Right.
I eventually rejoined the British UFO Research Association, went on to be their Director of Investigations, where we had a network of people across the country. So stuff would come past my desk.
I mean, was that a full-time job, practically?
No. Well,
or was you holding down a full-time job and doing all this additional work?
It was a full-time job as well as my full-time job.
Right. Okay.
You know, but you know, I get something come in from Kettering or whatever. And I used to have a list of people, and I'll pass that on to someone in that area to look into. Yeah. You know, and that worked, very, very well. Right. But like I said, the internet is a wonderful thing, but it's changed.
And do you think the internet is contaminating some of this evidence in some way, or would you say that the evidence and data that you were drawing out was somehow less contaminated? Because I think certainly with programs like the X-Files, etc., people now tend to have a predetermined ideas about what UFOs are, in terms of what aliens look like, and perhaps in the 1980s there wasn't this such. From reading early accounts, I know that there appears to be more diversity in the accounts of how the alien beings look, and then when you suddenly get into, let's say, in the 1990s, it all becomes very standard. There's a lot of conformity. So do you think that there has been some contamination with
absolutely. I mean, it's a cultural influence. Yeah. And that it's not just in this subject, but in music and multiple. The arts. There is a cultural influence from certainly from the United States. Yeah. And I'll give you an example. One chap I was having a discussion with recently, and I said, "Well, why don't you go and interview these people? I don't need to. I can get it all on the internet."
Right. Okay.
But you can't.
No, you can't. You need this.
You cannot, because sometimes it's not what the people tell you; it's the people themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And that you can't get that.
And it's difficult to read a person, isn't it? And you really, like what you're saying, you need to speak to that person. You need to try and ascertain how genuine they are and how they were affected by the case. And there may also be very small incidental details as well which are missed and which are maybe very important to the case. So,
well, I mentioned the young man who thought it was the Russians.
Yeah.
I call him David, that's not his real name. He lived near Pwllheli in northwest Wales.
Okay.
And the encounter it was one of his friend's birthdays. He was 18 at the time. Totally broke, like most of Wales, unemployed at the time. He was walking back from his friends. He said, "I was walking back on the main road." Well, you and I wouldn't call it the main road.
Right, off the beaten track.
And he said, up ahead, in the field was a light. And he said, one half of him said, "Go and have a look." The other half said, "No, don't." Anyway, he went and had a look. Yeah. And there was a thing in the field, looking pretty much like, he called it like the space shuttle. Although it wasn't the space shuttle.
Okay, right.
And then all of a sudden, somebody grabbed him from the behind. And there were these big humanoids with a hexagonal shaped heads, took him on board.
Well, they were wearing helmets?
That may have been the helmet, it may have been the head, he doesn't know.
Okay.
And he comes round, he's on the table, and he can see a screen with the planets going past. And he had his Walkman.
Right.
And they took the cassette off his Walkman and put it in this panel, and he said it was the most bizarre thing. In this otherworldly atmosphere when he's got heavy rock blaring out.
So they were playing this music or analysing...
They just played it, and they give him warnings of doom and catastrophe for the Earth unless we changed our ways.
Did they speak to him, or was it telepathic?
Telepathic.
Right.
Which was a common theme in those days. A lot of abductees were told we're heading down the road to destruction.
It's been a common theme throughout history, really.
Yeah, he was actually picked up by a police patrol car, staggering down the road.
Right, and totally dazed. And
yeah, took him home. Told his mum everything. He didn't need any hypnosis.
Right, okay.
And he was literally cowering in his bed.
Right.
And she found the one book in the local library about UFOs, and it mentioned a UFO group in Oxford.
Right.
And she phoned them up, and they said, "We'll come up there."
Yeah.
Anyway, the following day, he's still terrified. It started snowing, so she bundled him into the car, and off she went.
Right.
And just turned up on their doorstep. But when I went to interview David, I went to interview him a couple of times.
Right.
On one occasion, I said to him, "Will you take me to the location where this happened?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And I took some photographs. It's only when I look back at the photographs I realised how scared he was of being back at that location. Yeah. And I wrote and apologised to him.
Right. Okay.
That eventually was one of the accounts I used in my first book, which was called Without Consent.
Was there Was there ever a reoccurrence, or had there been strange
Not
occurrences?
that I know of, but...
so you just really chanced upon this for...
Yeah, I mean, I sent David a copy of the book when
Yeah.
it came out, and he didn't read it for 3 years, because it still scared
Because
the
he was still
bejesus out of him.
traumatised.
And he's now married with his own family. And
how does he internalise that now? Does he still think it's the Russians, or does he think that they were space aliens?
he just calls it was the Russians, I don't know. To him it was a physical reality.
Yeah.
And the bad guys at the time was the Russians. And it was his way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it does seem like it was a physical reality.
Yeah.
Somebody grabbed hold of him and put him on this object.
Yeah, I spoke to his mum, and
Yeah.
she said, yeah, he was absolutely terrified.
Right.
You know. And an interesting thing, which I don't know has tended to disappear, but there was a lot of the abductees at that time claimed that as a result of their experience, something else happened to them.
Right.
Take David, for example. He had long hair.
Yeah.
You know, liked his rock music. But he said, all of a sudden, Philip, I spontaneously started writing poetry.
Right, okay.
And he says, don't you dare write that, because I don't want my mates finding out, you know?
No.
But he put that down to as a direct result of what had happened to him.
Yeah.
And there was a number of them at the time, that some of them had become more spiritually aware.
Right.
Or interested in environmental issues and so on. But there seemed to be like an artistic side to it in some way.
Yeah, that kind of translates to the modern download, this idea that information is just suddenly downloaded into the mind. And that, in a sense, would make sense if these beings have access to a technology which is telepathic, in which that they can relay or transfer thoughts, emotions, feelings, etc. Yeah, I mean, I've read about abductees who claim that they've had this, suddenly they become, let's say, interested in architecture, but it's not just architecture, but it's really detailed information, let's say, about sacred geometry and how sacred geometry interrelates to acoustics, and how that could be, let's say, interface with mathematics, computer programs. And so it's really quite bizarre and very technical and often very specific as well. So I think that's quite interesting.
Well, it is. I mean, I interviewed a chap called Graham Allen in Staffordshire.
Yeah.
And Graham was a painter and decorator.
Right.
And he had this encounter, and they give him the information of how to build this machine. And Graham was so convinced by it that he went to the bank to try and get a loan to build it.
And what was the machine then?
He doesn't know what it was.
But he just wants to build this machine.
You know, and that's the kind of effect it had on him.
And this is, and we find this also within films as well, don't we? The Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the protagonist of the film has this, he really wants to go to this location and he doesn't really know why. So that, in a sense, is very interesting. I certainly know, I've got a friend, this is a friend in the States, and she was a portrait painter, and she just suddenly said, I had no interest in this whatsoever, and suddenly I got like a big download of information, and I wanted to write all these sci-fi novels about the history of humanity, and she does not know where that came from whatsoever. Apparently she's got like a film deal, or someone's interested in Hollywood, but for her that was quite surprising, because she was just driving the kids to school, and again, from what I can remember, in this case there wasn't any, if you like, interaction with strange beings or any strange phenomenon. It was just one moment she didn't have this information, and the next moment she's got all this information in her mind, and she just does not really know what to do with it.
Yeah, well, we often discussed, you know, when we were on the moors, what we would do if we did encounter the phenomena. We'd take photographs to begin with, but you know, we didn't really have a plan B.
I mean, would you, if you saw a spacecraft there, let's call it a spacecraft, would you be walking towards it, or would you be very cautious?
Well, that's it, we didn't really know.
You didn't really know.
I mean, you know, Graham, I'm not small, but Graham was a lot bigger than me.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know. But I said, to all intents and purposes, of all the people we've interviewed around here, we've not come to any harm.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't think we've anything to worry in that respect.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, we stayed up there for a week in a caravan.
Right.
And all we saw was the clouds and the rain.
Yeah.
And a lot of fun, but people came out of the woodwork from all around the area to report things to us. And what was, we already knew, but this confirmed it, that whatever the phenomenon was and is in that area, it wasn't a new thing.
Yeah.
It has been there certainly for decades. if not centuries. Because
Yes.
some of the reports we got went back a long, long way.
Yeah.
And it's when you look at the whole of the Pennine Hills,
Yeah.
it's the same thing.